Looking at these charts I made, you can see that there's a huge price discrepancy for some of these cards where I think I have more patience than brains, because I spent the last week trying to figure out what the best bang for buck GPU was on the used eBay market. And I think these numbers should be good for at least a month, if not 2 months, before the new GPUs come out. For the FPS numbers, I used Tom's Hardware. They had a nice article that came out about a week or two ago, and that let me figure out what the best numbers were. This should let you get a better idea of how well they perform based on their benchmarks. I pretty much grabbed every single pricing that I could for each of the graphics cards so that I should have a large enough sample size. If there wasn't enough, it says low sample size here. But otherwise, all of them should have a good enough sample size where we can gauge how well the pricing is. A lot of the mean pricing was actually still above MSRP, at least current pricing on the new market. If I were to buy one of these cards, I'd probably buy in the 25th to 50% percentile on the auction for eBay, where you're most likely going to get the best deals as long as the new pricing on like Amazon is higher. For instance, for a 6700 XT, I would probably put my bid price around $370. You're still getting a good deal versus the new pricing on Amazon.com or Newegg. In the description below, I'll have all the top 3 of each tier of GPU that you might be looking for. In the description, it'll lead straight to the eBay listing, so you won't have to fuss around with the filters on eBay. And I'll also give you the price range that I would bid at on the auctions, so you get the best deal. And I'll also compare it to Amazon, the pricing, to see if you actually want that, like to see how much cheaper it is versus an Amazon listing. Max and minimums will include stuff like laptops, as well as full desktops. So I excluded as many of those I could from the calculation, so you shouldn't have to worry about those. And the minimums, sometimes they're way too low. It's probably something like box only or something like that, which should also be excluded. Starting at using the 25th percentile, I calculated the frames per dollar for every setting they used in the Tom's Hardware survey. Looking at these charts I made, you can see that there's a huge price discrepancy for some of these cards where the wicks on these candles is the high and the low. No, actually, it's the 10% and the 90%. And the bases of the candle is 75% and 25%. With the high-end cards, while as you get into the lower-end cards, the older cards, there's a lot less price differences, price changes. So you can see that some of these have really, really long wicks. That is due to I wasn't able to filter out all the laptops and desktop computers. So the median, or not the median, but the average, the mean price is slightly higher on those models. But it also means that NVIDIA is actually selling a lot of 2070s, 2070 Supers, 3050s, 1660 Ti's, 1660, 1660 Super, 1060s, and 1050s in their laptops. Starting at using the 25th percentile, I calculated the frames per dollar for every setting they used in the Tom's Hardware survey, and these are the numbers I got. For medium settings at 1080p, the best settings I found that were above 60 FPS was at the top is the best performing cards, and the very tippy top is the 6600 XT, 6600, and the 5600 XT. as well as the 5700 XT and the GTX 1660 Super at medium settings at 1080p. 5600 XT, the 6600 XT, and the 6600, they both achieved a 0.5 frames per dollar. The 5600 XT is the last generation card. It is actually 30% slower than the 6600 XT, but it's significantly cheaper as well. The first NVIDIA graphics card versus a Radeon is actually in 4th place, and that is the GTX 1660 Super. That is quite a bit slower than the 5600 XT, only 83 frames per second, and the 6600 XT is at 136 frames per second. And the pricing on it is just way worse for what you get. So I would probably get the AMD cards at this price bracket, as the 1660 Super doesn't even have ray tracing. Unless you're using their encoder, there's no reason to get that over the AMD cards. Forgot to mention, at 1080p medium, the 5600 XT is the best card for only around $191 versus $230 and the $266 on the 6600 and the 6600 XT, but you get significantly less performance, and you don't have great performance at 1080p Ultra, which is going to matter in like 2 or 4 years time, where you might struggle to play some games because it's barely scraping by at the 1440p and 1080p Ultra settings. At 1080p Ultra, we have significantly less GPUs. Half the number gone now that we're at playable frame rates of 60 FPS in Ultra mode now. We have the 6600 XT, the 6600, and the 5700 XT. These are the same ones. These are like the same ones. And then lagging behind is the NVIDIA's 2070 Super and the 6700 XT. Most of these are actually AMD's giving out really good cards for the price at the used market currently. And yet again, we see the 6600 XT, the 6600, and the 5700 XT from last generation, also from AMD. And the best bang for buck NVIDIA GPU is last generation's 2070 Super RTX with the 5700 XT. So if you were only planning on playing 1080p Ultra settings, the cheapest cards you could get would be the 6600 XT and the 6600. They both have 6600 has 67 frames per second, while the 6600 XT has 78 frames per second. While the 5700 XT from last generation is 73 frames per second, and the 2070 Super is 76.4 frames per second. But the NVIDIA ray tracing may still be better. The AMD ray tracing won't be very good. So if you care about ray tracing, you might be better off getting the 2070 Super still. For 1440p 60 frames per second, we have even fewer cards. The best bang for buck currently is the RX 6700 XT and the 2080 Super from NVIDIA, as well as the RTX 3060 Ti, but that is significantly lower in price to dollar, or frames per second to dollar. The 6700 XT is able to produce 70 frames on average at 1440p Ultra, while the 2080 Super was able to do 65 frames, and 3060 Ti is actually able to do 70 frames. So the 6060 Ti is on par with the 6700 XT in the benchmarks that they performed on the different games. At this level though, the 6700 XT and the 3060 Ti have not great ray tracing performance compared to the higher tier models, so I'm not sure how much I would put stock into having those. So the encoder on the 3060 Ti would be better, but you're also paying a lot more for the 3060 Ti in a lot of cases. At the 25th percentile, you're paying about $371 versus the $401 with the 3060 Ti, but if you look at the 10th percentile, you can get at least $20 cheaper for both of them. But it's unlikely that you'll actually achieve that auction, as there's a very low volume for those kind of bids. Another thing to note is that 1440p, they are tied, but on 1080p Ultra and on 1080p medium settings, the 6700 XT has a slight lead by about 10 frames on medium and 5 frames on Ultra 1080p. For our 4K 60 results, there's even less cards that we will want to consider. The best price of performance is the RX 6900 XT, and second place is the RTX 3080, as well as the RTX 3080 12GB. The 6900 XT is going for about only $600 at the 25th percentile, while the 3080 and the 3080 12GB is going at $700 to $750, so almost $100 to $150 price increase. So you're paying a lot more for those frames if you're buying NVIDIA. Though the ray tracing support on the 3080 should be a lot better. You should be able to get more frames out of it if you have cranked up those settings really high. So you're paying about $100 more for better ray tracing support, as well as the LSS and the NVENC encoder, and better productivity should you need that. The 6900 XT was averaging about 63 frames per second, while the 3080 was at 60, and the 3080 12GB was at 66 frames per second, so they're almost the same. The 3080 12GB was about 10% faster than the 3080 at 4K Ultra settings. At 90 frames per second, it gets more interesting, where you can't do it unless you got a 6700 XT at minimum, or a 3060 Ti, or the RTX 800, just going around for $510 versus $400 and $370 the 25th percentile. You're going to pay at least $100 more used when the 6800 is about to get replaced by the new generation graphics. So I wouldn't be interested in the 6800X normal, 6800 normal at this price point at all, since it's about to be replaced really soon. If you're going to go to 90 frames per second at 1440p, there's hardly any cards that can run this. Only the 6800 XT, the 6900 XT have a good dollar per frame, while the 3080 lags quite a bit behind them. The 6800 XT has about $580 versus $610, and a lot, $80 more for the 3080, though you do get a bump in performance as well. Jumping all the way, actually no, you don't. You do not get a bump in performance. You're paying for the extra features that NVIDIA has, like the productivity features. Finally, at 4K 90 frames per second, there is no 4K at 90 frames per second. None of these cards could do it. So if you want even the most powerful card only gets 75 frames at Ultra at 4K. So you have to bump down the settings to like high if you want to achieve such high fidelity or play an older title. You can see that easier on this chart. There's significantly less GPUs than on the previous chart, where the best one is the 5600 XT, the 6600 XT, and the 6600. And the 5700 XT, wow, is there any NVIDIA GPUs? NVIDIA, the lowest is the GTX 1080. Well, I do not like that card though. It's getting really old for this. So the fifth place card would be the RTX 2060, which is really far down the stack in terms of price to performance. For fifth place, GTX 1080. Problem with the 1080 is that the drivers are going to become outdated much sooner than any of the newer cards because of this one is like a almost 6-year-old card at this point, I believe. At least 2 generations behind. 3 generations if you count the supers as a generation. Actually, it'd be 1080 and then 2080, 20 super, and then 3080. So you're quite a number of generations behind. I don't think they've got much left driver support left in them. And even any drivers they do get, it's going to come later than the newer cards because NVIDIA is only going to optimize the new cards first. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you liked it, consider leaving a comment and letting me know what GPU you're considering buying. And for more GPU related news, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. See you next time.